The morning my mother mentioned the washing machine, I was standing at her kitchen sink rinsing 2 coffee mugs. She said it the way she said most things, quietly, without drama, as though she was simply thinking out loud. She said she had been putting it off for a while, the washing machine, and that she thought maybe now was a reasonable time to take a small amount from her savings and replace it. I dried my hands and asked her how much she had in there. She told me a number. I asked her to check. She reached for her phone, the way someone reaches for something they expect to be exactly where they left it. She opened the banking application. She looked at the screen. I watched her face change. She said, "That can't be right." But it was right. It was exactly right. And I already knew standing there in her kitchen who had made it that way. My sister had always been the one who showed up. That is the thing I want you to understand first, before anything else. She was not the villain of the family in any visible way. She was the one who called on Sundays. She was the one who drove my mother to her annual cardiology appointment every February, who sat in the waiting room and brought a book and never made my mother feel like an inconvenience. She was the one who knew which pharmacy my mother used and which grocery store she preferred and which neighbor had a dog that made her nervous. Walking to the mailbox. I lived 4 hours away. I visited when I could. I called when I remembered. I told myself that Renee had things handled, and I believed that because it was easier than examining it. What I did not know was that Renee had spent nearly 2 years handling things in a very specific direction. It began, as these things often do, with something that looked like care. She had convinced my mother to add her as a joint account holder on her primary savings account. The reasoning was sensible. Someone should have access in an emergency, and Renee was the one who was there, the one who was present, the one who had already proven herself reliable. My mother agreed because my mother trusted her, and because at 68, after a minor health scare the previous year, the idea of having someone close felt like prudence rather than vulnerability. 4 months after that, Renee helped my mother establish a power of attorney. Again, sensible on its surface. Again, my mother trusted her. Again, I was 4 hours away and had no reason to question an arrangement that looked, from every visible angle, like a daughter taking care of her mother. What Renee did with that power of attorney was not care. Over the following 19 months, she transferred money, not in large amounts that would trigger concern or questions, in amounts that stayed below the threshold where anyone tends to look closely. 200 here, 800 there, occasionally 2,000. Always with a ready explanation attached. A repair that needed doing, a bill that had come in, a small medical cost that insurance hadn't covered. My mother, who had spent her entire adult life being careful with money, trusted the explanations because she trusted the person giving them. $43,000. Transferred in pieces so small they were almost invisible. Gone. I did not react when I saw her face change over the phone screen. This is important because my instinct was to react. My instinct was to call Renee immediately, to say her name out loud the way you say someone's name when what you mean is an accusation. My instinct was to do what most people do when they discover something like this, to perform the emotion of it loudly, in the direction of the person responsible. I did not do that. I asked my mother to sit down. I sat across from her. I asked her to hand me the phone, and I looked at the transaction history. Every entry, every date, every amount, going back to the beginning. I took screenshots of every page. I emailed them to myself before I handed the phone back. Then I told my mother I needed to make one call, and I went outside to her backyard, and I sat in the garden she had kept for 30 years, and I called a woman. I knew who practiced elder law. I told her what I had found. I told her about the joint account, and the power of attorney, and 19 months of transfers. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she told me what I already suspected, which was that what Renee had done had a legal name, that it was not a misunderstanding, that it was not complicated to prosecute once properly documented, that the most important thing I could do right now was not to say a word to Renee until I had spoken to the right people and built a complete picture of what had happened. Do not tip her off, she said. Not yet. I went back inside. I helped my mother make lunch. I listened to her talk about the neighbor's garden and a book she had been reading and whether the weather had been unusual this spring. I kept my voice at the same temperature it always was. I asked about the cardiology appointment she had coming up. I stayed for dinner. I washed the dishes. I drove home 4 hours in the dark, and I did not call Renee. Over the next 6 weeks, I moved carefully. The first thing I did was help my mother revoke the power of attorney. We did this with a notary in writing, without telling Renee in advance. The same week, Renee's access to the joint account was removed. My mother changed her online banking credentials and set up two-factor authentication. We transferred her remaining savings to a new account at a different institution entirely. My mother continued to answer Renee's Sunday calls. She continued to send the occasional text. She said nothing about what we had found and nothing about what we had done. This cost my mother something. I could hear it in her voice when she called me afterward, the effort of it, the specific exhaustion of performing normalcy towards someone who has betrayed you. But she did it because I asked her to and because she understood why. Renee had no reason to look. She had no reason to check whether anything had changed, and so she did not check. And we were left to work in silence. I filed a formal report with Adult Protective Services in my mother's county. I submitted every screenshot, every bank statement, a written timeline I had constructed that accounted for every transfer from the date Renee had been added to the account to the date we had closed her access. I included the dollar amounts and the dates and the pattern of transfers, the deliberate smallness of them, the consistency, the way they had continued for 19 months without interruption. I also contacted the Financial Crimes Unit at the local police department. The investigator I spoke with was careful and professional. She told me that financial elder abuse was one of the most common forms of financial crime in the country and one of the most underreported because families were reluctant to file against their own. She said it as a fact, not a judgment. I told her I understood that and that I was not reluctant. Then I made one additional call. Renee worked as a bookkeeper for a logistics company in the city where she lived. She managed accounts. She had access to company funds as part of her ordinary responsibilities. I did not accuse her of anything in relation to her employer. I contacted their HR department, and I informed them, in plain language, that Renee was currently under active investigation for financial crimes and that they might wish to conduct an internal review. I gave them the case number so they could verify I was not fabricating the situation. I did not know what they would find, but I had spent 6 weeks learning exactly what Renee was capable of when she believed no one was watching, and I had a feeling. The charges came 4 months after I made that first call from my mother's garden. Financial elder abuse? Theft by deception. The case was straightforward, the investigator told me, because the documentation was thorough and the pattern was clear. And Renee had not taken any steps to conceal the transfers beyond, keeping them small. She had believed that small was invisible. When the logistics company conducted their internal review, they found what I had suspected they would find. Renee had been doing something similar there. Not $43,000, but a consistent pattern of smaller diversions over a period she had calculated was long enough to go unnoticed. She was terminated the week the investigation opened. She lost her professional certification. She was not rehired. The court ordered full restitution. $43,000 returned to my mother, plus interest, plus the legal costs my mother had incurred. Renee received 3 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, said that people who exploit the trust of elderly family members through legal instruments designed to protect them represent a particular kind of betrayal that the court did not intend to treat lightly. My mother sat beside me when those words were read. She had not cried through most of this, not when we found the empty account. Not through the investigation, not during the months of Sunday phone calls she continued to answer while the case was being built. She cried then. Quietly, the way she did most things. I held her hand and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. It took 14 months from the day I sat in her garden taking screenshots. 14 months of dinners where Renee's name came up and I kept my face still. 14 months of being asked by other family members how Renee was doing and saying I wasn't sure. I hadn't spoken to her recently. 14 months of watching my mother perform a version of normal that was costing her something real every single week. People talk about patience as though it is a virtue you either have or don't have. I don't think that's what it is. I think patience in situations like this is a decision you make every single day. A decision to stay quiet for one more day, to document rather than react. To trust that the process, if you feed it carefully and completely, will arrive somewhere real. It arrived. My mother got every dollar back. Every single one. Renee lost her career, her income, her professional standing, and whatever story she had been telling herself about what she had been doing and why. I do not know what that story was. I don't think it matters. What matters is this. My mother worked as a school nurse for 34 years. She packed her own lunch every day. She drove the same car for 12 years. She kept a paper notebook on the kitchen counter where she tracked every dollar she had ever saved. Written in her careful handwriting, updated every month without exception. That notebook represented 34 years of decisions, 34 years of choosing carefully and living within what she had and building something small but solid that was entirely hers. No one gets to take that, not quietly, not in small amounts, not with a power of attorney meant to protect her. Not from a daughter she trusted, with her Sunday mornings and her cardiology appointments, and the name of the neighbor whose dog made her nervous. Not from my mother, not while I am paying attention,